Okay, so we're gonna make a very simple app for now. It's just gonna display a random number. So when the component initially mounts, it's gonna generate a random number, and then it'll display it. So in order to do that, we're using functional components. So we're going to need to use use effect and state. So we'll import that. And then the state will be whatever random number we get. So const. And then if we just want a random number to appear when we first load the app, then we'll use effect to make that happen. So use effect. And then in use effect, we're going to get a random number, which easy to find. I just copied and pasted. So math.floor. So this is to be a random number between 1 and 10. And then we will set the state. So set number. Oops. And the number will be rand. And then we will pass in set number. Okay, and then here we'll display the number. All right, save that, and that's working. And if I refresh, I should get more random numbers. So nothing surprising here. But now let's say that there's a problem. So we can, instead of just directly rendering, we'll do a check just to simulate some kind of error happening. So if number is less than or equal to 5. That's not raise, it's throw. Okay, so that just happened to go on the first time. Let me try it again. So it's good. I'll refresh, and now I get an error. And if this happens, so I'll show you that one more time. So when you get an error, when you're in development mode, you get this page, which gives you some debug information. If you click off this X or press escape, as it says in the bottom, you'll see what you would actually get, which is nothing. So you probably don't want that to happen. So what you do is you write a component that kind of wraps, so you can wrap whatever you want, but in this case, we'll just wrap the entire application. We'll wrap the entire application in basically an error handling component. And React doesn't have hooks to do this directly, at least not at the moment. So you have to use a class component for this. And the class component, there isn't like a specific component that you import. There's just a couple lifecycle methods that you can tap into. So what we'll do here is I'll create a new folder because we're going to end up creating a couple of these. One's called error handlers. And then I will call this okay, so this main error boundary, we're going to wrap our entire app. So if any error happens in our app, this is the page that will get displayed. Okay, so we have this component right now. It's not doing anything, but I'm going to go ahead and import it here into the index.js. This is where this is kind of the real core where everything gets pared down. So I'm going to wrap everything here. This will be import. Main error boundary. And then I will just put this here. Some formatting. And there we go. So now we actually, of course, we haven't written this component yet, but now our entire app will be wrapped in this. And if anything happens, then this is what we'll get. So the main error component. So how do we, what's like the API for doing this? Well, there's basically just one method that you need, and that is called get derived state from props. So there are a lot of lifecycle methods, as we know, and one of them is get derived state from props. It's actually a static method. So it's get derived state from error, sorry. So get derived state from error. It'll take in the error. And I'm just going to return something for now. Oh, sorry, this is a, need to make this class component. Wasn't paying attention. Let me start over and use my fancy stuff here.
So you can't make this functional, this has to stay class-based?
Yeah, at least for the time being. I'm sure that that will change in the near future, but. So we need to do static. Okay, and then, sorry, this return again. Okay, so we have this get derived state from error. We didn't talk about, there's a couple other get derived state lifecycle methods, but what it allows you to do, so whatever you return from this basically will be the new state. So we're able to take a look at what the error is, and then we can change the states of this component accordingly. So we're basically not going to care about the error. We can console log it. So we'll console log the error, and then what we're going to do is you can return. So this is actually a component. So if you look at the Yeah, it's not compiling now. You can't see the hierarchy, but we'll see that in a sec. So it's a wrapper. So the component needs to be able to handle rendering child components. Otherwise, it's just going to show this all the time or nothing if the condition isn't met. So we're going to create a trigger that's going to either render this basically when there's an error. Like if there's an error, then we want to render this. And if there's not an error, then we want to render the children. We just want to pass everything through basically. So we're gonna basically set a trigger. So the trigger will be false. And then we'll see if this method gets called, there's an error. So we'll do this dot set state. Actually, sorry, we don't even do that. You just return it. So whatever you return from this function is going to be the state. So we're going to return, this is going to be true, and then we're going to put a condition here, and we'll render so in the render, you can do if trigger this dot state, sorry, this dot state dot trigger. Pull that up. Otherwise, we're going to return so this right here just makes this component generic. It can pass through everything it gets. Okay, so I'm gonna have to import component. All right, so let's see. That looks like it's working now. Okay, let's try refreshing this again. And we can see, so this is our app in its correct normal state. And we can see that we have this other component. Just like when we use router, we end up getting all this nesting. So we have this here, this main error boundary component, which is above app. And you can see that main error, the main error boundary has props, which is that component that it's wrapping. Or sorry, it has children, which are props. And it also has this state, which is false, and then app also has its own state. And if we refresh this and we get an error, so because this is development mode, it's a little kind of wonky. So you see that component displays initially, but then it gets replaced by this debug screen. So you can check this out. You can also just close this, and then you'll be able to see what your app is actually rendering. So here we see that something went wrong, and here you could have try again or whatever else you want to do here. But that's the basic idea. So rather than getting just nothing or having everything blow up, you can have a little bit more control over it. Okay, so that's like the built-in React error handling. There's another third-party library that someone has made, React error boundary. Then we'll just check this out. So I'm just going to go through the documentation just for the experience. So we'll install this first. And so let's say we have an app and we'd like to have some kind of basic backstop just for anything that happens. So we have this main error boundary wrapping everything. But if we have specific components that might be doing things that are more risky, like making API calls, we can actually wrap those specifically in their own error boundary. So that's what we're going to do. I'm going to create another component here. And this will just be, I'm going to use the dummy API to get some users. All right, and so display users, I'm going to do basic stuff we've seen several times. I'm going to make an API call, which means I'm going to have to use effect and use state. So I'll create my state. And then the use effect, I'm going to make my API call. And I will do let me grab that. All right, got the users. And yeah, let's do some error handling. So and then finally, we will set the state. So I'm just gonna, I'm not gonna render it properly. I'm just to show that the data is there. So set users.
Do we need wait in front of res.json?
Yes, thank you. Okay, and then I'll also pass in set users and call get users. Okay, so this is pretty standard so far. And then I'm gonna display what we get from the state. So and I'll have to wrap this in a div. All right, I'll run this. And we're not actually doing anything with this, so we need to import it and then render it in app.js. So the display users. Okay. Let me turn down the. Okay, so this is obviously looks terrible, but we can see that we're getting all the information. And then we can see the hierarchy, the main, and then app, and then display users with the state. So so by default, fetch won't throw an error if you get, you know, if you don't get the information that you want. So if you want to make sure that you're handling this, there's a couple of things you could do. But we're going to use an error boundary here. So if the status is 200, then that's fine. Otherwise, we're going to throw an error. All right, and I'm going to go to app, and I'm going to turn that off. So now this is working. Every time I do it, I can see that I'm making the API call. But let's say there's a problem of some kind. So in this case, the URL is bad, but this could represent any problem. So I get this, and it's not handled. So we can handle this error by using this particular library. So if we look at the README, you can see that you have to import error boundary, this error boundary component. And then here's a fallback. So this is like the component that we wrote wrapping our entire application right here, this main error boundary. So you write it, except in this case, it can be a functional component, which is one of the reasons this library exists. So we have a functional component here, and then our the error boundary, we wrap around whatever specific component we want, and we pass it a prop, which is going to be the component that we want to render in case there's an error. So let's go ahead and do that first step. So error boundary, well, let me install that. I think I installed it already. So in app, which is rendering display users, I'm going to go ahead and wrap this, potentially dangerous component. Yeah, up there. So by the way, these are both called error boundary, but that doesn't have to be the. This is just a normal. This is just a normal component. You can call this anything. I called it main error boundary. Okay, so we're in app. We've got this, volatile component wrapped in an error boundary, and looking at the docs, we need to pass it another component to render.
Chad, just to confirm, the second error boundary, it looks like the slash is still coming at the end of it. Is that how it's supposed to be?
Oh.
So like,
yeah, I don't think so. Yeah.
So wouldn't the second one have the slash at the beginning instead of at the end? Or am I, yeah.
Yeah, it shouldn't, yeah. I'm not sure why I did that. Or maybe I just did that. Thank you. Okay, so we have our error boundary here. So now we're going to need to basically write whatever we don't need to write the error boundary itself, but we need to write the component that will end up getting rendered. And so we can do that here. I'll just copy this error fallback and I'll put it in its own file here. So I'll put this in error handlers. What was that called? Error fallback. Okay. So we're not going to worry about that. I'm just going to get rid of that for now. Okay, so now we have this component. So within app.js in the error boundary, then we just need to pass that in as a prop. So we look here and we see fallback component. So that's the name. Fallback component equals that component that we just made. So we'll have to import okay, so I'm gonna change display users. So that should be working fine now. So let's take a look at the app. You can see that we have this additional component. So the main error boundary is handling everything. We have the app, and then the error boundary specifically handling display users. So now if we get an error in this component, let's try it again. Let me see. This component should be rendering. Oh, maybe there's an issue here. Error boundary. Yeah. Error is null. Oh, sorry, I think I'm missing a piece here. Sorry, my bad. So it happens when you stop without finishing the readme. So here's the first part. This is the setup. And then let's see, where was that? Second. Yeah, okay. There we go. So here's how you actually implement that. So there's another, there's a hook you can use here in the component that you are actually wrapping. So looking at the display users component, you can see that we're throwing an error here. But what we actually want to do is we can throw the error and then we can catch it and then handle it. So I'm going to wrap all of this in a try catch block. I'll catch the error. And then when we catch the error, we're going to use this hook that we're going to import. And we're going to call, we're basically just going to call it in the catch. So use error handler, and then here we go. We can drop this in here. So now we have this hook available, and in the catch block, we can call it with the error. And I'll add here. All right. So now that's actually working. So notice that app is still rendering properly. So this stuff we're getting from app. So app isn't affected, but the component that made that API call that's handling the error, this is now rendering something else. So if you have a bunch of different components on the page and you don't necessarily want the whole page to go away, you can kind of contain what happens with these errors. And there's also, you might have seen from the documentation, there's basically a way to reset. You can pass another handler for resetting or getting back to a legal state in your app. That's basically it. I just wanted to introduce the idea of error handling in React. It can be useful. I would at least, as for your personal projects, things like that, I would at least put an error handler at the top level. All right, any questions about that? Okay.